Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In this section I'm going to set you exercise 09, which is the final exercise on the course. Exercise 9, when I describe it to you, will probably sound pretty straightforward, but there are one or two things in it that you need to be just a little bit wary of, and you may finish up scratching your head a little bit about one or two parts of this. So what I'm going to do is to give you quite a big clue to begin with. Let's suppose that I'm going to write a macro, and the macro I'm going to write is really simple, and that is all is going on is to remove any filter that I currently have on a project. Now, in order to start this macro recording, I'm going to click on the status bar button, and I'm going to give my macro a dummy name. So why don't I just leave it and call it macro 1. I'm not going to give it a shortcut key because this is a temporary macro. And I am going to store it in the global file. So this is all fine, and I'm going to click on OK. Now, all I really want to do is clear any filter that's currently applied. So what I'm going to do is to just click and say no filter. And that's all fine. So I'll stop recording my macro. So let's click at the bottom, stop. And now my macro is ready to run. Now, in order to test it, I'm going to go into the resource sheet. I'm going to go to the View ribbon, I'm going to go to the Macros button and View Macros. There's my macro 1 and I'm going to run it. And I get an error. Now you might be surprised that I get an error because if you look at the View tab filter, it says no filter. Why have I got an error? Now I mentioned earlier that you have the option to say end, which basically stops the macro running. So let's click end and it will take you back to project and then you can do whatever you need to do. The alternative way when you get a problem is to click on debug. So let's go back to macros, back to view macros. Let's just very quickly run that macro again, but this time I'm going to click debug, which will open up the Visual Basic Editor. And you can see that it's highlighted the command that's failed. And as you can see in this case, the command that's failed is filter apply equals all tasks. Now, if you look at that and think about what we just did, you think that's not what I did. I didn't say select all tasks for my filter. I said no filter. And actually, there are a variety of situations where you do something when you're recording a macro, and what Project 2019 records can sometimes be subtly different. And of course, in this case, when you're looking at the resource sheet and you select a filter on the resource sheet, there isn't a filter called all tasks because you're looking at resources. Now it's no good changing this to say all resources because if you were on the tasks sheet then it wouldn't work. So there is another alternative to making sure that no filter is being applied, and it's one that I mentioned much earlier on in the course. And if you look at the filter drop downs, hopefully you will see it. And doing that instead of selecting the filter, no filter will work. So you need a little bit of investigation and a little bit of head scratching to work out what would be a better way of making sure that no filter is applied. Now, using this as an example, having clicked on debug and looking at the macro itself, the sub macro 1 looked at that command, hopefully figured out what was wrong. When you've finished investigating, all you need to do is close the VBA editor and click on OK to stop the debugger, and it will take you back to your project file. So having given you a little bit more information there and a bit of a clue about one of the problems you might well come across, let me now actually set exercise 09. First of all, there is an exercise 09 project file to start from. So in exercise 09, you need to create a macro, which first of all clears any filters on the current view, clears any groups, and then applies Gantt chart view, followed by the filter for incomplete tasks. And then I want you to group by critical, but with the hierarchy maintained. And somewhere within that is another little challenge for you. Make sure the timeline is shown. So just to recap, clear any filters, clear any groups, apply Gantt chart view, filter on incomplete tasks, group by critical, but with the hierarchy maintained, and somewhere in there, make sure that the timeline is shown. And having recorded and edited as necessary, just make sure that it runs from 2 or 3 different starting points. So say from the resource sheet and maybe from the network diagram view. My answer to this is in exercise 09 answer. That's it for this section. I will see you in the next.